Good morning. I'll start by introducing our guests here this morning, one by one. I'll begin with the person closest to me, Jafar Panahi, who is the bride in the film. Or rather, the bridegroom.
Vaïd Mobasseri,
who's Vaïd.
Thank you.
Aziz Pakbatan, qui joue le rôle de la mariée.
Pakbatan, who is the bride.
Alors, Jafar Panahi, je ne vais pas vous le présenter, mais quand même, depuis qu'il fait des films,
He's been making films for quite some time and has often come to Cannes.
Depuis, il a éclusé, je pense, tous les festivals du monde.
I think he's been around all the festivals in the world, the greatest ones, Locarno, Berlin, Venice, Cannes.
Dès sa première présentation à Cannes, c'était le Ballon Blanc.
His very first film in Cannes, The White Balloon, Caméra d'Or.
Jafar Panahi
a
reçu des récompenses
has received awards for all the films that have been selected for major festivals, except one,
Ceci n'est pas un film,
which is called This Is Not a Film.
Pour laquelle il n'a pas eu de prix, c'est qu'il était présenté
and it didn't get an award because it was not in competition. Next to him, we have Mariam Afshari, who is an actress. She plays the part of Shiva.
À côté d'elle, Ibrahim
Next
Azizi.
to her, Ibrahim Azizi.
Il joue le rôle de Eqbal.
Enfin,
pour ceux qui n'ont pas vu le film, est-ce que c'est Eqbal ou est-ce que c'est pas Eqbal?
Is it really Eqbal or not? You'll find out when you watch the film. And at the end of the table, we have Philip Martin,
vous le connaissez comme producteur.
You know as a producer, I'm sure.
Producteur de
d'Anatomie d'une
chute.
Of the Anatomy of a Fall, and Arthur Harari and Christophe Honoré's films, and he will be able to talk about his adventure with Jafar Panahi. I'd like to begin by putting a question to Jafar. In the meantime, raise your hand if you have a question. We'll alternate between the two sides of the room. May I remind you of the fact that you need to stand up and introduce yourself before you actually ask your question. Jafar,
could you
tell us a bit more? We haven't seen one of your films for a couple of years now, so could you perhaps sum up what happened over the last few years? In other words, between your previous film and this one? A simple accident. It was just an accident. First of all, I'd like to say good morning to you all and thank you very much for attending this press conference. My penultimate film was Three Faces, which was screened in Cannes, and then Aucun Ours, No Bears, followed. At the time, it was screened in Venice while I was actually in prison, so I couldn't attend the screening myself. Subsequently, I waged a hunger strike and I was released from prison, yet it took a bit of time for me to get back on my feet and get back down to work. And the upshot of this work is what you saw yesterday.
Levez-vous, s'il vous plaît.
Please stand up.
Pour qu'on vous voit.
So we can see you.
Oui, oui, allez-y.
Allô, c'est ici. Moi, je m'appelle Tiziana Haricot de la télévision autrichienne. Une question pour Jafar Panahi.
I have a question for Jafar
moi, c'est le
Panahi.
film plus violent que vous avez
this is the most violent film you've made so far.
C'est pourquoi? C'est peut-être pour despair qui est grandi ou pour une autre raison?
Is it out of despair? What was the reason underlying this?
ببینید ما فیلم هامون رو از شرایط و محیطی که توش هستیم میگیریم یعنی
My films are always inspired by the environment in which I find myself. I hadn't gone to prison previously. My environment was just Iranian society. what I could see, observe, inspired my films, the daily life of perfectly normal people. But once you've been sent to prison, inevitably, you are influenced and impacted by what you experience there and what you see. I don't know whether I would refer to this as violence, however. Non-violence also can be found in violence. Throughout the film, one of the recurring themes is to avoid violence, and this is directly mentioned by several of the characters. In this film, we show different groups, different ways of reacting to what is happening, just like in any society today. In Iranian society currently, you have all sorts of different groups. You have very radical people and very, very simple people. Perhaps you read violence into this, but everyone can interpret things in their own way. People perceive the film, no doubt, differently and will interpret things differently as a result. I'm very pleased indeed to see you here today.
It's a great pleasure seeing you here, and what struck me most is that normally, Mr. Panahi, you're the lead actor in all of your films. For the last 15 years, it's always about your situation, and in your film, Where Are You, Jafar Panahi, you say that because of the regime that is isolating you, you can just tell stories about yourself. And that's why you're doing it. And now it's the first film where you actually are not participating as an actor. And I wanted to know what led to this, to have a scripted film where you're not in front of the camera. Thank you. Merci.
بخوایم تقسیم کنیم به نوعی 3 دوره فیلمسازی من وجود داره. یک دوره قبل از اولین بار زندان رفتن من بود و
there have been 3 stages in my filmmaking. First of all, there was the period before I was sent to prison, and I was not allowed to work. I was banned. So I was behind the camera and I viewed things in the outside world. Then I got a 20-year ban on making films. Even my closest friends had lost hope. They thought I would give up entirely. I'd give up making films and I'd do something totally different. However, I looked for solutions. I said to myself that I didn't know how to do anything else apart from make films. And it's the basic truth. People here probably know that I'm incapable of replacing a light bulb. I don't know how to screw a screw. One day I asked my wife, where can I find the butter for breakfast? And she said, in the cupboard. And I went to open the cupboard because I believed what she was saying. I don't know how to do anything at all apart from making films. So I was banned from making films for 20 years. It was a huge shock, and I had to react. The solution I found was to film in secret. That was a way of paying tribute to the cinema still. I had no choice, however, but to be very introspective and to see everything from my stance, from my viewpoint. So the camera obviously turned on myself. Now that this ban has been lifted and that I'm allowed to do my work, I don't have the right to travel, but more recently I've been given that right again. So I was able to go and meet my distributor, and then I was able also to come here to accompany my film. My method of work has not changed, however. Even if I do not suffer from any personal bans anymore, the films I want to make don't necessarily follow the legal means for making a film in Iran. Normally, you have to submit your script to the ministry, and if you don't get an authorization, then you can't make the film. So I still have to continue working in the same manner, even if this is a new stage that's opened up in my life. We'll see where it leads me. Good morning, everybody. I think it's in 2010 or 2011 when you were in prison that I saw one of your colleagues, and I said, well, how are things going? And he said he's free to say he's not free. And that's what I thought about when watching your film. Between 20 and 50% of films over the past 3 decades have taken place in cars. Is this for reasons of economy? Your film starts, the opening scene is in a car. Women without a veil in a car are sentenced to pay a fine, but your camera is there, even if the women aren't wearing veils. How do you explain all that? Thank you.
بعد از جنبش مهسا یه تغییر اساسی تو ایران رخ دادش.
After the women and freedom movement, there was a fundamental change in Iran. I was actually in prison at the time, and I didn't realize what was happening in Iranian society. I didn't assess it properly. I couldn't. A lot of people didn't understand what was up, in fact. For about 3 months,
واقعا همه جام کهیر زده بود، همه جا رو نیش زده بودن و هرچی التماس میکردم منو بیرون از زندان
There had been an epidemic in the prison. I had a very strong allergic reaction.
3 ماه منو بردن.
I really insisted on being let out because I needed to go and see a doctor, to go to hospital. And it's only after 3 months that they actually agreed to take me to hospital. When I went out into the streets, I realized that life had totally changed. Women, at least those who wanted to, were in the streets without a veil on, without a headscarf. As I am a filmmaker who depicts the reality of society, there again, what I try to show is reality as it stands, what I observe in the outside world, in the streets of Tehran. In this film, I didn't ask any of the extras to wear a headscarf or not. They came as they wanted. A couple in the street recognized me when I was filming, and as they recognized me, I said to them, well, would you like to be an extra in my film? And the lady said, if you want me to put on a headscarf, the answer is no. In other words, it's the people, it's the women themselves who uphold their rights. And as to the car, you feel very safe in a car, much safer than in the street. That's always been the case, in fact. If you have a camera in a car, nobody notices you. But if you take the camera out into the street, then you start to have problems. Right at the end of the shooting of the film, the van was quite small, so a small number of people from the crew went to shoot a sequence. We just had the actors, the DOP, the sound engineer, and the remainder of the team then called us up to say that the security guards had come to see them. That was a fairly conventional situation. They said, no, we have 15 people in civilian dress, in civil dress, so we really had to change our tack. I think it was 1 o'clock in the morning. In the meantime, We hid all our equipment and all the rushes because we didn't want them to take them away. So they didn't find anything. And we were reassured because we knew they wouldn't confiscate the film. They searched for a couple of hours and then they released us the next day. They called a certain number of the crew members in and said that they wouldn't be allowed to continue working on the film. So that's my answer when it comes to the car. You feel very safe in a car, in a vehicle, particularly when you're shooting a clandestine film. For us, it was a question of safety. Other people might give you a different answer. I'm Mikala from Reuters.
A question for Mr. Panahi. What elements of this film were influenced, directly influenced by your experience in prison? For example, none of the characters saw their torturer, so they had to rely on their different senses to identify him. Was this something that you experienced? Or else, what were the other experiences that you brought into the story? And just a question for some of the cast. Majid, Vahid, you seemed quite emotional after the screening yesterday. How did it feel for you? Did you expect that the film be received this way in Cannes? Thank you.
اجازه بدید اول سوال دومتون رو دوستان جواب بدن بعد من جوابتون رو میدم.
Perhaps I'll let the actors answer first and then I'll give you my answer. Good morning, everybody.
به خاطر اینکه مجدد یادآوری شد به ما که درون چه فضایی داریم زیست میکنیم و در عین حال بله
We were given quite a reminder because we were reminded of the world in which we actually live.
و این واقعیت جامعه ما هست.
To sense this compassion, this communion on the part of the spectator was deeply moving. It also reminded us of the real situation here. It was a great joy for me to work with Jafar Panahi, who is so masterful. For me, it was a pleasure, and I learned so much working with him. We put our heart and soul in the film, our energy. We worked with great sincerity. We felt deeply engaged in the film. We actually discovered the film yesterday. We hadn't seen the final result, so it was a huge surprise. It was a wonderful discovery to sense this emotion when watching the film and see the reaction on the part of the audience. We, of course, were extraordinarily happy, and I hope you also had great pleasure watching the film. I'd like to add a point, if I may. Good morning, everybody. We were very deeply moved because we were deprived of our most basic rights. Why, as an artist, should you be prevented from taking part in such a film? It's not worthy of art. It's not worthy of the human race to be thwarted as an artist in this manner. That's why we were so deeply moved yesterday evening.
تماشاچی‌ها کردن حالا صحبت‌هایی که بعداً به خصوص خانم‌هایی که در ایران یه همچین تجربه‌هایی داشتن گفتن خیلی تاثیرگذار بود.
The compassion we sensed yesterday,
هیجان این که میتونیم نشون بدیم که توی چه شرایطی داریم کار می‌کنیم و تو چه شرایطی
for what we endured in Iran. All this was deeply moving. It was also a way for us to show what we're actually going through, the struggle we are waging. And people who aren't from Iran and the Middle East are able to understand this so deeply and feel for us. That was deeply moving. Good morning. There's great pain and suffering in these characters. When you watch the film for the first time, you are really struck by this pain.
اینها سرکوب شده بودن. هیچ وقت جا نمیتونستن فریاد بزنن دردشون
the repression these people have suffered from. They weren't able to cry out their pain and suffering. They were inhabited by silence.
چقدر میتونه وحشتناک باشه
And that's what greatly moved me, this horror of this silence. As to your first question, some details spring from my own experience, granted. The first time I was sent to prison, I was blindfolded and put in a room. First of all, I was put in a cell which measured 1.5 by 2.5 meters. I hardly had room to lie down or to walk around. To go to the toilet, I had to ring a bell. We were allowed to go to the toilet 2 or 3 times a day. To go out of my cell, I had to have my eyes blindfolded, and then I was conducted to the toilet. And it's only once in the toilet that you could remove the blindfold, and then you had to put it back on to go back into your cell. At the time when I was being interrogated for 2 or 3 or 8 hours at a stretch, once this man was interrogating me, he was sitting behind me, and it was the time of prayer. He went out to pray and then continued with his interrogation, which lasted for 8 whole hours. And throughout that time, I was very close to a wall. I was almost sitting against a wall. I was actually sitting on a chair against a wall. And the man was taking notes behind me. And then he handed me the papers, and I was allowed to lift up the blindfold a little bit in order to read through the deposition and sign. That lasted for a fortnight. I was in total isolation under those conditions. Then I was taken to a slightly bigger cell. It was about twice as big, but we were 3 people together, and the other people had just been arrested. Recently, when I was thrown back into prison, the conditions were very different. We were in a huge cell. There were over 300 prisoners, and only about 30 of the prisoners were political prisoners. Most of them had been there for 15 or 20 years. They'd spent over half their lives in prison. These people had a different knowledge of prison. They'd heard all sorts of testimonials that they could talk to me about. Obviously, I was fascinated, really curious to hear what they had to say. We spent hours and hours talking together, listening to their stories. Everything you see in the film is not necessarily my own experience. You see the experience of the Iranian people who've spent 40 years in captivity. It's been a half century now that the Iranian regime has locked up its own citizens. Even on the set, when I had to shoot certain scenes, I still consulted these friends who'd spent so much time in prison, much longer than I had, and I asked them whether the scene appeared real, and the lines as well. The person who helped me write the script, my co-writer, has been sent back to prison. He's currently in prison today. And that's what all the Iranians have to endure. I spent less time in prison than these other people, in fact. I would like to ask a question to someone who hasn't taken the floor yet. How did you co-produce this film, Philip? And under what circumstances did you do the work with Jafar Panahi?
Alors, la collaboration avec Jafar Panahi, Elle date de plusieurs années.
I've been working for several years with
Jafar.
For 5 years, I took care of a digital platform
qui avait été créée par l'Opéra de Paris.
Created
Et
by
le
the Paris
principe était de
Opera.
proposer à des artistes de faire une création pour cette plateforme. Et à un moment
propose
donné,
to
avec
authors that
le garçon
they
qui produisait
create
des
something
films
for the
avec moi dans
platform.
cette plateforme,
And the person
on a
who
eu
worked with
l'idée de
me on this
proposer à
platform
Jafar Panahi de faire un film.
decided to ask Jafar to make a film.
Donc c'était particulier puisque
It
on
was a
pouvait
bit
évidemment
special.
pas lui parler, pas le
Obviously,
rencontrer,
you couldn't
il n'y avait pas de
speak
contact, mais
with
on est
him
passé
and
par
meet him. There was no
l'intermédiaire
contact.
d'un de ses très proches
We went
collaborateurs,
through
Pouya, qui est présent au premier rang
one of
ici,
his
qui a été
very close
essentiel
colleagues who's
tout au long
played
du
an
processus
essential role
du
throughout
film pour lequel on est là aujourd'hui.
the
Et donc on a passé
process
cette commande
of this film.
à Jafar Panahi de ce film
We asked Jafar
n'avait
Panahi to
comme
make this film.
contrainte simplement qu'il fallait
The
que quelque
only
chose dans le film
condition
évoque
was
l'univers de
that
l'opéra.
somewhere in the film he
Et
had
ça
to
pouvait être
talk
ce qu'il
about
voulait.
the opera
Et on n'a plus de
in the
nouvelles.
words and in the way he
Et
liked.
peut-être
We
un an
didn't
plus
have
tard,
any further news, and then
Pouya nous
about
a
a
dit,
year
tel
later,
jour, il y a
we
un
were
disque
told,
dur qui va
yes,
arriver
one
à tel
day
aéroport, il faut que quelqu'un aille le chercher. Et
hard
là,
drive will appear at
on
the
a vu le
airport,
film,
someone will have to go and fetch it.
C'était une
And
pure
we were
splendeur,
able to
vraiment
watch the film, which
un des
is
plus beaux films qu'on ait fait pour cette
incredibly
plateforme, si ce n'est le plus beau.
beautiful. It's
Et,
one of the most wonderful things we've
et
ever
donc,
been
à
able to
partir de
place
là,
on the
on a
platform.
parlé un peu de production,
As of
mais
that
je
time,
dirais
we
a
started talking
posteriori.
about
Et
production.
puis, quand Jafar a eu l'autorisation de
As
voyager,
Jafar then
il est
got
venu à Paris
an
au
authorization to
printemps,
travel. He came to
de
Paris
l'année dernière.
in the spring
Et,
of last
et
year.
là, on s'est rencontrés pour la première fois.
We met for the very
Et,
first time in
Jafar a
person.
évoqué la possibilité peut-être de refaire un film assez
Talked
vite.
about
Il m'a pas trop
making
dit
another film
exactement
quite
de quel
quickly.
film il
He
s'agirait, mais
didn't tell me exactly what
voilà,
kind
moi,
of film
j'ai
he
juste
wanted
pris
to do.
l'engagement que s'il faisait ce film, je
I
serais là.
promised that if he made the film, I would be there when he needed me.
Et c'est ce qui s'est passé. Il
And
a fait
that's
le
what
film
happened.
assez vite. J'ai
He
su à un
made the
moment
film
donné qu'il
quite
tournait,
quickly.
mais j'avais
I knew
très
that
très
he
peu
was
d'informations.
shooting,
Et
but
puis, à
I
un
didn't
moment
have much
donné,
information. In
voilà,
fact,
il m'a dit ça y est, le
at a
film
given
est
point
fait.
in time, he said,
Et là, on
well,
a
the film
commencé à
is
parler. J'ai fait
ready.
mon travail un peu a posteriori.
And
C'est-à-dire
I
ce
saw
que je
the
fais en
work
général.
afterwards. Usually, I see the script, I raise the financing, but in this case, I did all that once the film was actually ready, had been made. I went to see Memento, the other partners, who had already distributed 2 of Jafar's films, and MK2 as well, which is very keen on Iranian films.
Et ils ont tout de suite été
And
d'accord,
immediately they agreed, without knowing anything at all about the
et à
film.
partir de là, la collaboration, je dirais, plus habituelle avec un cinéaste a commencé
collaboration
sur la
then
post-production. Et là, on a
became a
beaucoup
more
plus parlé
customary
avec
one
Jafar
with the
du film
filmmaker.
et beaucoup parlé au montage.
We talked a lot
Voilà,
together
c'est un petit peu
during the
nouveau comme
editing
façon de faire,
process.
mais,
It's a fairly novel way of
assez
going
passionnant.
about things, but it worked out very well. Thank you.
Hello, good morning, David.
ببخشید من یک اضافه کنم به صحبت‌های فیلیپم گفتش که
If I may, I'd like to add a few words. As Philip said,
اومدن ببینید من
it's after the actual shooting of the film that our collaboration was able to begin. That's what I also do in Iran. That's how I go about things. Despite the financial difficulties, I never start working with someone beforehand. I just make do with my own personal money. If at the very beginning someone accompanies me, someone helps me with the financing, then I have a sort of obligation to finish the film, whatever the case may be. Even if it's not a good one, I have to deliver it. So I myself shoulder all the different aspects of the film, then at least I can say to myself, if I don't like the film, I won't have to sign it. It gives me great independence. I can be a free agent in that manner. I'm not linked to any specific person. I'm the only one who needs to take the decisions. That's the way I go about my work. It's the case of other filmmakers as well, who have to make their films in secret.
I'm David Martos from Quinótico in Spain. Mr. Panahi, you said a few minutes ago that there are no bans over you in Iran right now. Do you think that the projection of the film here in Cannes can change that situation that could endanger your return to Iran? And do you think that the film community is really aware of what's happening in Iran? We are fighting hard enough against the censorship and the mistreatments you just depicted? Thank you.
من مثل مردم توی کشورم تمام مردم رفتار میکنم. هر روز یه ممنوعیتی در مورد حجاب هستش.
Behave just like other Iranians. I'm not a special case in any manner. The Iranian women are forbidden to go out without a headscarf, but they do so anyway. It's a ban. They're perhaps endangering themselves if they do so. It doesn't matter. I'm not doing anything more heroic than what all the Iranians do. As soon as I finish my work here, I will go back to Iran the following day. And the day I'm back in Iran, I'll ask myself, what's my next film going to be?
Hi there. Hello. Adam Plowright from AFP News Agency. Congratulations to all of you on the film. It's a question for Mr. Panahi and the rest of the cast. I was wondering if you could tell us about if the efforts were made to prevent this film coming out in the first place, and has there been any other pressure that either you have felt or your families over your participation in the film? Many thanks.
من جواب بدم یا دوستان؟ ببینید همونطور که گفتم ما تا اواخر کارمون رفتیم و تونستیم مسائل امنیتی رو رعایت کنیم و نذاریم مشکلات به وجود بیاد. اما
were able to finish the shooting and we escaped the vigilance of the security forces. However, as soon as people heard the film had been selected for Cannes, particularly in the last fortnight, the situation has become more complicated. Several members of the crew were called in for questioning. My DOP and myself went as well because we didn't want them to be all alone. So we went for questioning to the ministry and were waiting for them to be released. They called in the actors, the bride, the groom, Shiva, in addition to my DOP. So a lot of pressure has been brought to bear upon them. They've been threatened. But I knew we held the winning card because the film was already there and they couldn't do anything about it.
Est-ce que les acteurs peuvent et les actrices peuvent répondre aussi
à ces
questions? Parce que en tant qu'interprète, comédien, comédienne, vous vous exposez peut-être plus.
You're perhaps even more exposed because we see you on the screen more than the more technical members of the crew. We've seen films in Cannes, some of Jafar's films, and Rasulov's films, and there are no credits at the end, so as not to endanger the crew. But we see you on the screen.
C'est un choix de votre part de participer à un tel film.
I guess it's a choice on your part to be involved in such a film. Could you tell us about any possible pressure that may have been brought to bear on you?
حضور ما در این کار
Our presence
خطری که برای ما داشت خیلی 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 کمتر از خطری داره که برای تمام زنان ایران هر روز داره
to much less danger than Iranian women on a daily basis, as Mr. Panahi has just mentioned. Of course, we had some issues, but they weren't that serious.
اینکه حالا ما برگردیم چه اتفاقی میفته من بهش آگاه نیستم چون تجربهشو ندارم.
What's going to happen when we go back to Iran? I don't know. I can't foresee what will happen because I've never had such an experience. But truly, it doesn't really matter. It's true that once the film had been announced as being selected for the Cannes Festival, we were put under pressure. We were threatened. We were questioned. At the beginning, it's very scary, I must admit. I'm very young, and I was worried for my family. The presence of Jafar Panahi and his wife and the DOP, because they were with us, and that really comforted us, and I thought, well, it's really worth it even if something happens. What will happen when we get back, no one can tell. We weren't under pressure beforehand because nobody knew that we were in this film and what kind of a film it was going to be. But Iran is our home country, and we have to fight to ensure that our homeland fares better and progresses. We have to do our utmost to achieve this end. We don't have many means to do so, but we have to do our best with what we have to ensure that this country, which is our country, rises above the situation in which it currently is. So it isn't so important what may happen to us personally. What really counts is the fate of the country. Of course, we have to measure our choices. We did so when deciding to be a part of this film. I didn't come under pressure recently, but when, as mentioned by Jafar Panahi earlier on, when the security turned up on the set, I wasn't there personally that day. Subsequently, I was contacted. An unknown number rang me up. And when it's an unknown number that appears on my phone, I don't usually answer. When they finally got hold of me, I said, well, I'm not doing anything wrong. It's my right. It's my right as an artist and as a human being, above all, to do my work and to join the projects which I think are fine and right. If you think I shouldn't be doing this, then come to my home and arrest me. Otherwise, I have absolutely no reason to answer your questions.
یک چیز رو اضافه کنم. همیشه واسم واقعا سورئاله، واسم خنده داره اصلا.
For me, it is pretty absurd and surrealistic. How can you throw an artist into prison and not understand what this really stands for, what it really means? When you throw someone in prison, you actually give the artist a springboard. You give him ideas. You open up a whole new world to that artist.
یا قبلی که ایشون گرفته دارید میبرید توی یه فاز دیگه. در واقع باید بگیم که تصادف ساده رو
You could say to them, well, you're opening up a whole new path for us. I didn't make it, it was just an accident. It's the Islamic Republic of Iran that throws us into prison. It's the Islamic Republic of Iran that made this film. It should realize that when it throws an artist into prison, it has to bear the consequences. Given current technological possibilities, no power that be can prevent an artist from doing his or her work. Even in a cell, the artist will continue to express himself, even in secret. When a country behaves in that way with an artist, it cannot gather any other fruit than that. How could you throw a singer into prison?
دوستان دیگه همه اصلا یعنی چی اینا؟
all these singers. How you can throw a musician or a singer into prison? Do you believe that someone can actually be thrown into prison in Iran simply because he sang a song or posted a tweet? Sometimes you post a tweet and you say, other people say you like it, and that can suffice to throw someone into prison. It's hard to believe. My co-writer is currently in prison, but I'm sure he'll be released from prison with all sorts of other scripts in his head. You'd find it hard to believe me. There's so many examples I could give. It's a totally absurd situation.
Monsieur Panahi, je suis ravi de vous retrouver ici avec nous.
I'm very pleased that you are here today with
J'ai
us.
adoré votre film.
I loved your
trouve
film.
qu'il est d'une brillance narrative formidable.
I think the narrative is outstanding. I have a question about the script. Could you please tell us
comment avez-vous développé le scénario? Comment vous
you
avez composé
developed this
l'histoire et les
script?
personnages?
How did you put together the story and the characters?
همونطور که گفتم خب تو زندان من گوش میدادم به قصه‌های مختلف وقتی که اومدم
I listened to the stories being told to me.
ایده اولیه به ذهنم رسید که
when I was back out, things suddenly fell into place.
شادمهر راستین و آقای
with
نادر سایور مطرح کردم دوستان یه سری اتود زدن به من دادن و دوباره رو کار کردیم نهایتاً مرحله‌ای که
we started to work on it. We developed the script, and once we got to the stage of writing the lines, I worked on this with Mehdi, because I wanted him to be the person who actually wrote the lines, particularly during the interrogation scenes. I felt that his experience was extremely valuable. Even on the set, he came as an advisor, a consultant, to ensure the sequences looked really real. So it was a lot of joint work that went into this film. I'm very grateful for this collaboration.
Une dernière question parce que le temps passe et que nous avons encore
Time is marching on. We have a few more questions.
سلام آقای پناهی، من مریم زهدی هستم از BBC فارسی. همونجوری که خودتون هم حتما متوجه بودید در روزهای اخیر یک تقابل و دوگانگی وجود داره که یه عده معتقدن که همونجوری که شما گفتین راه حل سینمای زیرزمینیه و بدون مجوز کار کردن. یه عده دیگه معتقدن که بدون مجوز اگر کار نکنن
without an authorization in a clandestine manner is the only means to go about things. Others
شما این نسخه‌ای که برای خودتون پیدا کردین و گفتین که راه حل رو در
سینمای زیرزمینی پیدا کردید.
آیا قابل اجرا برای بقیه منتقدها هم میدونید؟
You've said that the solution for you is clandestine filmmaking. Do you believe, however, that everyone can make this kind of choice? What advice would you give to your peers in Iran? I don't think there's any instant answer. Each individual finds his or her way of doing things depending on his or her knowledge or abilities. It's a very personal choice, I think. I can't give advice to anybody. I can't say what kind of film should exist, what shouldn't. I can't say how you should make a film. We've been fighting for years now. We don't want people to dictate the way in which we can make our films. So I'm not going to give advice or proffer advice today.
من یادمه که
I don't want to lay down the rules, far from it. Before encountering all these difficulties, I remember all these students who wanted to be filmmakers. They were desperate. They came to see me and they said, we have too many obstacles, there are too many constraints, we're not allowed to go about our work. And then once they saw the kind of difficulties I encountered, once they realized I'd found a solution and that I'd managed to make my films, they realized that I was not the kind of person to come and speak to tears in one's eyes. Everyone has to find his or her way of going about things. That's what I wanted to say, therefore, about my peers. I can't give them any advice. I can just say that you can always find a solution.